Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Makeshift Madness. I'm Jim Ballou, and in this video we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite subjects, tools. Mainly, we'll be considering tools for camping, bushcraft, and wilderness survival. My hope with this video is that it sparks ideas, stirs your imagination, and possibly inspires your own creativity. So I hope you'll stay tuned. Let's get started. So I decided to divide this particular bushcraft tools video into two separate topic categories: multi-purpose tools and acquiring our tools. Almost inevitably, discussions about tools for wilderness survival eventually wind around to the "what if I were stranded with only one tool" hypothetical, with the obvious question being, which tool would I want it to be? As much as I love the versatility of knives of all kinds and view a blade of one form or another as perhaps our most fundamental of tools, closely followed maybe by some form of axe for chopping and certain carving chores, actually I believe I would personally lean more towards a plier tool of one variety or another. And here, there are plenty of excellent options available to us nowadays. Some of my favorites are any of the larger multi-tool models from Leatherman. A super tool or wave made of stainless steel would be a godsend to us in any real survival situation, no doubt, considering all of the different useful tools it contains within it. For example, the wave not only has a very good needle nose plier on it, but also some excellent blades, a file, a wood saw, and even scissors, among other things. And then the wave folds up into a compact unit. When the Leatherman Super Tool first came out, I bought one, and it was my favorite tool at the time, and it's just an excellent tool. Stainless steel, locking blades, and it's got a lot of good ones on it. Metal file, the usual knife and wood saw, and just all kinds of goodies. I especially like this needle nose plier. Look at how narrow they are. Excellent for if you've caught a fish that swallowed the hook, reaching down in there and grabbing that hook and pulling it out. Also, if you're stitching leather and you need to grab onto the needle and pull that through tough leather, there's nothing like this tool to get that job done. So yes, this is just an excellent multi-tool, and on both edges you got a measuring scale. What's neat about this is when you fold it out and you push it together, you've got a full scale that goes from 1 to 9 inches. So that's just another neat feature about this tool, which folds into just a nice narrow brick. I love this tool. Since the original Super Tool was introduced, Leatherman has come out with some model variations, but in this one, the blades would lock, and the way you would unlock them is you would open another blade. So by opening that one, I can lock this one, and that's just how this one worked. The original Leatherman tool came out in the early 1980s, and as I remember, it did not have locking blades. But since then, there have been numerous models, and here we show only 4 different examples of Leatherman models. We've got the Leatherman Super Tool, the Leatherman Wave, the Skeleton Tool, and the Leatherman Micra. And in many of the tools, they range, depending on what you get, they can range from anywhere from $30-something, I think retail price, all the way up to the Surge, which I think is about $150, to the Leatherman Charge, which I believe, last I looked, is right around $160 retail price. So you can get all kinds of different variations of Leatherman tools, and all of them are excellent products, and they just all have different kinds of functions. And as much as I like Leatherman products, this truss from Gerber is a nice little plier tool, and it's got lots of handy blades on it, just like a Leatherman does. And what I like about this tool, you know, you've got your Phillips screwdriver, you've got a blade with a good serrated edge on it, you've got a saw, a wood saw, and lots of other things. So it's a great tool. What I especially like about this tool is the price. They retail for a lower amount than many of your Leatherman tools, especially like the Leatherman Wave or Super Tool. So this is a good option for somebody that wants to pay about $40 for a tool and not $90. Just as with Leatherman and S.A.K, Gerber has produced a number of different models of plier tools over the years. And Gerber also has its own line of more expensive, higher-end plier tools. But here's another model in pretty much the same price range as the truss. This one is the suspension. I think it's a decent product for the money. And on the packaging, Gerber lists 12 different tools, if you want to include the lanyard hole as a tool, as it is on their list of tools. Comparing these two products from Gerber, the truss shown on the left and the suspension on the right, I personally prefer the truss. It has at least one more tool than does the suspension, and also the tools on the truss, to me at least, seem a little bit easier to open. And I think of these as Gerber's economy line. And both of these tools I have are made in China. But again, for their price range, these are not terrible tools at all. Both the truss and the suspension have this type of locking system. You open a tool and then you grab this tab on both sides and you pull it back, and then you can close the tool. A multi-tool that I found that's in the $40 range, I think is the best of any of them in that price range. That is the Next Tool Flagship Pro. And this little goodie, you can tell it's well made, it's well machined, and it's got a spring-loaded plier, and you can see the wire cutters are removable in the jaws, and you can also see that it has a belt clip mounted right on it. And this is a really good tool for several reasons. One of them is it's got the best scissor, at least the most robust scissor of any of these tools I've ever seen. This thing is, you get a lot of grip with this scissor, and it's really robust, and it's big, so that's neat. Also, the tools on this, the blades, like the knife blade here, is well, let's get this. You can open the blades without opening the plier, and that's really neat. It's got a saw. It has a main blade, and look at the size of this main blade. That is one serious blade, and it locks, and it's a liner lock. And then the smaller tools you can access here from inside. You've got the bottle opener, can opener stuff, and you got a gut hook or some kind of hook, and you've got those tools. And this is a really good tool for $40 in my opinion. I like this better than those Gerber tools. So yeah, Next Tool. I saw this advertised on the internet on Amazon for right at $21, and I was intrigued, so I sent for it. And I thought, what could I get for $21? I thought, well, it's probably some little keychain tool or something. But this thing is huge. It's robust. It's styled somewhat similar to like one of those Gerber tools, but it is heavy. And I'm thinking it's probably too heavy that I would want to carry on my belt. But it's a very, as you can see, it looks like it's surprisingly well built, and it's obviously made in China. But you look at that saw, and that thing's got some cutters on it, and the blades lock, and then you have this little button you depress to unlock the tools, and it's got some neat tools on it. A little scalloped serrated blade, and the tools appear to be kind of robust on this thing. Nice blade. And so for that kind of money, I think this wouldn't be a bad thing for your fishing tackle box or for a toolkit, because $20, you buy a couple bags of chips and a 6-pack of beer, you're pretty much into a $20 bill. So I don't think this is a bad investment, actually. And then you have this thing, and then you have all these tools that will fit into there. So you have screwdriver tips, they fit into there. And so, yeah, it probably weighs a pound or more. But I think for the money, probably worth it.
Here's a truly fascinating multi-tool plier tool I ran across some time ago, which I believe is quite different from all the others I've seen. This is the Buck tool from Buck Knives. Now watch how this model opens up. It's very interesting. It appears to be made of stainless steel, and besides its plier, it includes the usual variety of knife blade and other smaller tools. I like the fact that it has locking tools. However, I personally feel that it's a little bit awkward to use. The pliers, because of the way the unit opens and closes, the handles sometimes tend to want to fold during use, and I don't find the grip very comfortable. But the design is nevertheless one of the most intriguing innovations I've ever seen with these multi-plier tools, and I wanted to share this with the viewers.
And besides the Leatherman, Gerber, and S.A.K tools, we find plenty of imported copies and knockoffs, mostly made from China. But usually these retail for right around $10 or less. And are they inferior in quality? Yes, absolutely. Can they be used? Are they functional? Yes, they can be used for a lot of different things.
And let's face it, some projects warrant the use of some kind of sacrificial tool that will sustain a degree of abuse you'd normally prefer not subjecting your better tools to. This is one way in which those cheap junk tools could serve a viable purpose.
I've always been fond of Swiss Army knives, or S.A.Ks as some people like to call them nowadays. This is the Huntsman from Victorinox. As you can see here, it includes some of the handiest tools, including the regular and short knife blades, bottle opener, can opener, wood saw, screwdrivers, awl, scissors, and the corkscrew.
And the corkscrew is the handiest tool for picking apart stubborn knots.
It even has a little tweezer that fits right into there. And on the other side, it has a little toothpick. And this is just a great little tool. My only issue with it, if I were to find something, is that the blades don't actually lock. So it can fold on your fingers. And even Survival Lily, in one of her videos, she talks quite a bit about an injury she received from a Swiss Army knife that folded on her hand. But the Huntsman from Victorinox is nevertheless a wonderful product, and it contains such a variety of small tools. It can accomplish a great deal more than what we can explore in a video of this length. And so I think it's like so many other things. You learn to work with what you have. And in this case, you just, while you're working, you be careful not to apply pressure on the back of the blade so it can fold on your fingers, and you keep your fingers out of the way. Now, it is, of course, possible to find a Swiss Army knife with a blade lock. And this particular model, made by Winger, and Winger was one of the two companies in Switzerland that made high quality Swiss Army knives, the other being Victorinox. And several years ago they merged, so this particular model I don't believe is available anymore, at least not in this particular configuration, I'm pretty sure. But it's pretty neat because it's got, on the main blade, it has a little serrated section, and it's, you know, the blade is fixed, so it's not going to fold on your fingers. And then you just press the button to unlock it, and it's a great little tool that, you know, it's got the really nice wood saw and the corkscrew and several other handy blades. But so you're not totally out of luck with a Swiss Army knife as far as locking blades go. So, and we can actually do leather work with our Huntsman Swiss Army knife. We can cut out our pattern with the little scissors. And we can use the awl on the Huntsman as a stitching awl because it has a little eye in it. Anyone who's ever used a speedy stitcher knows exactly how this works. So pull the cord through, and then go to your next hole. And by the way, I pre-poked all my holes because I could do it with the awl, but I wanted to save time. And so you pull it back enough to grab a loop, and then you can feed your running end through it, and then you just move on. You just go down the line, pull it through, push it through, same process. And you can stitch up a project pretty quick this way. In my own humble opinion, the little plastic toothpick that comes with a lot of these Swiss Army knives just doesn't seem like a very important tool. You could sharpen a little stick out in the woods and you clean your teeth with that. But fortunately, there's a company called Tortoise Gear, and they make a little ferrocerium rod that fits right into that slot. And they come with a glow-in-the-dark tip, so you could have a ferro rod with your Swiss Army knife. In a survival situation, you could make strike fires. So to me, that seems like a really good change out. For a 3-pack, I think with shipping and everything, you're looking at about $20 for those. I ordered some, they just haven't come yet for this video. So, but I wanted viewers to be aware that those do exist. And that for years, I believed that the original Swiss Champ by Victorinox was the Swiss Army knife with the most tools. And you can see here that it does have an impressive assortment of small tools with it. even a small magnifying glass. But they kept adding tools and making them bigger, like the Work Champ and other newer versions of the Swiss Champ that also include a small pair of pliers and even a ballpoint pen. The largest of the Swiss Army knives also come with the largest price tags, however, and they're not necessarily always convenient to carry everywhere. More recently, I learned that the largest Swiss Army knife ever made was the Wenger Giant, which is apparently no longer in production, but it featured 87 different tools, was over 8 inches wide, and weighed almost 3 pounds. So basically, it was more of a novelty than an actual practical use kind of tool.
There are quite a few videos on YouTube dedicated to Swiss Army knives and clever ways how they can be used. My favorite videos are those created by Felix Imler, who also has written books about Swiss Army knives and whittling projects using them. But he's got some other excellent videos as well on various bushcraft techniques and building things like wooden tongs, pinecone torches, camp equipment, hatchet modifications, and so on. But I can't imagine any discussion about Swiss Army knives that didn't mention Felix Imler. And if you check out some of his videos and his books, I think you'll thoroughly enjoy them just as I do.
Besides the Swiss-made Swiss Army knives that, as was already mentioned, were produced by two different competing companies in Switzerland, Victorinox and Wenger, actually both for over 100 years, until Wenger was acquired by Victorinox in 2005. But nowadays, another company in Switzerland, Suiza, produces a very similar product in many ways, except they call theirs Swiss knives rather than Swiss Army knives. Suiza has a long history as a respected clock and watch maker since 1904, but started marketing their knives in 2015. Now they catalog a respectable line of multi-blade pocket knives. This is the D06 by Suiza. What I like about this tool, it's a very high quality tool. You can just tell when you look at it closely. It's well made, and the nail nicks, they're cut clear through, so you could open it, grab it from either side to open the tools. And it's got it does have a reamer awl with a very sharp point and a eye for sewing, and it's got a very excellent Phillips screwdriver and various blades and an excellent wood saw. So I do like this tool. It is a, oh yeah, and also the main blade locks, and to unlock it, you push this little cross in, and as you can see, it moves. It's a liner lock, and that moves the liner out of the way, so you can close the blade. So that's an excellent feature, a locking blade. So yeah, I think this is an excellent little product, and it also has a tweezer, most of them, and
This vintage multi-tool was manufactured probably over 50 years ago. It was made in Japan. Rather than having some version of a pliers or knife as its main feature, it has the fork and spoon that fold out, plus several other tools. It's rather bulky and appears to be fairly crudely made, but it does offer a high degree of multi-purpose functionality, and I think it's just kind of an interesting tool overall. Somewhat similar, but typically smaller folding knife tools that include the spoon and fork are occasionally found in the camping section of some stores, and a number of variations can also be found on the internet. A tool like this might be worth keeping with your camping gear, along with your mess kit.
one product, a common product that I think I would include in the multi-tool category, is the traditional fence pliers. They've been around for a long, long time, and they are a multi-purpose, multi-function tool. So what you have is a hammer surface for hammering, usually used for staples, for fence work. So you would hammer the staples in. You've got they call it a hook. I would call it like a horn for pulling staples. You've got pinchers and crimpers and grabbers, that kind of thing right in here. Down here you could also, you could crush walnuts or whatever you want there. Here you've got wire cutters, so you could shear strips of wire with that. So it's a very at least 4 different functions you would have with a tool like this. And I think this is probably one of the original early multi-tools that people don't always think of as a multi-tool. But, you know, just imagine how many things you could accomplish with just this one tool. So, the way I see it, we basically have 4 different options for outfitting ourselves with the desired tools for camping and bushcraft. The first possible approach is to purchase the best quality factory-made tools we can find, mostly new, if we have the budget that can afford them. This option has the advantage of ultimately outfitting us with the best tools overall, depending on our specific product selections, of course. The obvious disadvantage to this approach is that some of us may not necessarily have the budget to accommodate such a strategy, or if we do, in some cases, it could take a very long time to collect most of what we want. The next option is to rummage at garage sales and flea markets for usable tools on the cheap. This is a way to save a lot of money, as so many serviceable tools can be had for literally pennies on the dollar. But it too can take a long time to acquire all the desired tools. And in a lot of instances, tools will need to be cleaned up or broken items repaired before they'll be completely usable. Our third option is we could improvise or custom make our own tools, or modify existing old junk tools to suit us, or make them more operational for our purposes. This approach often appeals strongly to hobby blacksmiths and others with a lot of creativity. And finally, our fourth option for acquiring tools is some sort of combination of the first 3 described here, which is exactly what I do quite often. For example, this hatchet right here is my favorite hatchet that I own, and I own a number of them. This one I found at a yard sale some years ago, and it's just been an excellent tool. And the only modifications I made to this hatchet were I rounded the corners on the bit, and probably not everyone would think that's a great idea, but I liked it because if I were to rely on this tool in the wilderness and it was my only edge tool, at least I would have a hide scraper where the corners of an axe wouldn't catch the hide and tear it. Also, I wrap the handle with cord, so I have a supply of cord, and it makes a more comfortable handle. And finally, online, I found this mask to protect the head of the hatchet, and I like it. Here's a tool which I purchased brand new. It's a trowel, which I liked because it's heavy duty aluminum. It's real thick, but when I bought it, it had a bright orange plastic handle, which I did not like. So I found this piece of hickory, and I bored a hole into it and set this thing in with JB Weld, and it's just a tight fit. It's not breaking for anything. So I like this a whole lot better than what I had. Here's a knife I found at a garage sale years ago. I didn't like the handles it had, so I made my own handles out of oak, and I cut the blade down a bit. It was a sort of a butcher knife, I guess an old hickory style, and then I just found a sheath for it, and it's been a really good camp knife. And this Easy 6 Rowan belt knife is my favorite field knife, and I just bought it brand new when I bought it, and I didn't modify it at all. I just kept it the way it was. One of the very first tools I created in my backyard forge right after I set it all up 23 years ago was this shamefully crude pair of pliers, which I forged out of a discarded stick of rebar that I had cut in two, and I had formed the pieces to match up the jaws, then riveted the handle pieces together at the fulcrum using a smaller diameter section of steel round stock. Clearly, it's not as refined or as well designed as even the simplest of modern factory-made pliers. And considering the time involved in creating something like this, I would agree that nearly any used but functional pair of pliers found at a garage sale would be the more economically practical option. In my own experience, 50-cent pliers are not all that hard to come by. But as a grabbing or gripping tool, this homemade tong-style pliers is very effective. And I think it's a good example of how a basic but very usable tool could be fabricated literally at a remote campsite, and conceivably with only the help of a campfire to heat the steel, rocks to serve as hammer and anvil, and maybe a large rusty nail to function as a hot punch to punch the rivet holes. But this does function as pliers. And here are three knives that together represent the four categories just mentioned for acquiring our bushcraft tools. The first one is a medium-sized fixed blade that was purchased new. And I think of it as an example of a quality and somewhat expensive at just over $100 factory-made hunting knife. It has the full tang handle that makes it an inherently strong design. It came from the factory with a sharp edge. For the size of the blade, it has a relatively thick spine, which naturally gives it extra durability. I believe the steel is 1095 high carbon, which properly hardened as this seems to be, allows it to be able to hold an edge quite well. We'll delve into knife steels a bit later on, but this is an example of a decent tool for hunting, camping, and general bushcraft in my view, and also an example of a tool purchased new. Next, we have a good lock blade folding knife, an old timer model 470T, made in the USA by Schrade, when they were still being made in the US. It features a relatively wide blade that appears to be of stainless alloy, and part of the blade is serrated. And I think this gives it added versatility. It was purchased secondhand at a yard sale for less than half of its original new price, and it's still in very good usable condition. So this is an example of what I would consider a decent tool for field use, purchased used, and very affordable. And finally, this third knife represents a perfectly functional homemade tool, and it's a kind of rustic Bowie style knife I made over 20 years ago, specifically for a wilderness backpacking trip. And it served quite well for that purpose. I cleaned a couple lake trout with it, sharpened a few sticks that I pushed into the ground, and also used it to harvest some pine boughs for a ground covering where I wanted to sleep. It's visibly a bit crude, but it was created in somewhat of a hurry for the trip it was meant for. As you can notice in a close-up, it was ground from an old worn-out flat bastard file. This was actually a common method for knife making many decades ago, because files contain some of the hardest commonly available steel, and a knife made from a file will tend to hold an edge quite well. The drawbacks to this type of knife are, first of all, since files have to be harder than the materials they are made to cut, they are also normally very brittle. So if I were to try using this blade to pry with, as it retains its original heat treatment as a file, it would most likely just snap. We'll talk more about this later. Also, Using the tang of a file set into a piece of antler like this design lacks the full tang handle that serious hunting, camping, survival knives should really have for durability. For this knife's handguard, I found a piece of brass. It's actually a letter opener at a yard sale. Shaped it and formed it for this handguard, and I also used a large steel washer, which I tried to decorate with file cuts. It's just kind of crude, but it was the style I wanted. And if somebody wants to make a knife like this, it's actually a pretty good project, and you can make a pretty decent knife. And if you needed to carve wood or sharpen sticks in a survival situation in the wilderness, a homemade knife like this will actually get the job done. And here in just a bit, we'll talk a little bit about this sheath that I made for this knife. And even though it is perfectly functional, there are lessons to be learned. If you decide to make a knife out of a file like I did, you will probably want to find an older flat file because the steel will most likely be plain high carbon rather than some unknown alloy. But this might actually only matter if you were to try any kind of heat treating, which chances are you won't need to do. And if the teeth are worn smooth, that's less grinding time for you. If you plan to set the tang into some type of handle material like hardwood, bone, or antler, you can use a strong 2-part epoxy. JB Weld is my favorite bonding epoxy for this purpose. In the old days, before they had such strong epoxies to work with, it was common to cross pin or rivet the file tang with the handle. If you want your knife to have some type of handguard, this could be made out of almost any durable material like aluminum, brass, or even mild steel. You'll need to make a hole through the middle of the handguard to receive the tang of the file. And start shaping the outside. And then you can file the inside of the hole into a rectangular shape for a perfect fit. Unlike the working surface of the file, its tang will usually be much softer and easier to drill or cut into. I recommend making a series of saw cuts on both sides of the tang to give it more bonding surfaces with the epoxy inside the handle. A section, a pipe, and a mallet are really handy for seating the handguard onto the tang. You'll need a bench grinder, preferably with either a new grinding wheel or one freshly dressed for even grinding. And an 8-inch diameter wheel will be easier to work with than a 6-inch wheel. And you can shorten the length of the file to some more preferred shorter blade length by securing it in your vise and smacking it with a heavy hammer the way I usually do. Or you could use the more controlled method of fitting a section of steel pipe over the part to be removed and just snap it off. Grind slowly and gently to prevent overheating and try to maintain an even bevel. To prevent overheating your steel, periodically dip your blade in water. And you'll need to prepare your handle to receive the tang. And then make sure everything fits together the way you want it. Then once you've set the tang into the handle with epoxy, find some way to clamp it all together. Before closing this video, I wanted to talk about this sheath I made and the drawbacks to it. So what I did here is I just used sections of copper wire. I think they were like 1/4-inch diameter copper wire, and I drilled holes in the leather, and I just slabbed the 2 pieces of leather together, drilled the holes through the leather, and then just peened the copper down over an anvil. The problem is leather is soft. It's much softer than the brass, and so you go to peen the brass and it doesn't really have any, it just spreads out the leather, and it, as you can see, it doesn't, it wants to collapse sideways depending on how long you make your little sections of copper. And So it's a real tricky deal if you used, and there I was too close to the edge. It works, but if I'd have used washers, small washers, it would have had something to mushroom into, something to when you're peening it down, which would have been a lot better because it doesn't really, it worked, but just not very well. And I just wanted to explain that. This is one way to make a sheath. There are plenty of other ways, but it functional, just not the best. Well, that concludes this episode of Makeshift Madness. I want to thank you for watching, and until we get together again, stay creative.